This week on Quality Digest Live, we'll talk corporate social responsibility with author Wayne Visser.
Plus, it's 2015. Where's my hoverboard? We'll find out when we come back.
Where's the Cubs? Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for November 6th, 2015. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
He is, and I'm Quality Digest publisher Mike Richmond. We're going to start the show this week with news from the U.S. Department of Labor, specifically from the department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration agency. Next week, OSHA will be holding a public meeting of the Whistleblowers Protection Advisory Committee. The WPAC was established to advise and make recommendations to the Secretary of Labor and the Assistant Secretary for Occupational Safety and Health regarding ways to improve the fairness, efficiency, effectiveness, and transparency for OSHA's whistleblower protection activities. The Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970 established that employers are responsible for providing safe workplaces for their employees. Section 11C of that act specifically protects employees who report violations of various security laws, trucking, airline, nuclear power, pipeline, environmental, rail, maritime, healthcare, and workplace safety and health regulations. Yeah, all the consumer safety, everything. So it basically protects all these people for blowing the whistle on misdeeds on any of those individual sectors or areas. OSHA clearly recognizes the importance of the on-the-spot reporters to help ferret out miscreants and wrongdoers within industry, especially if those misdeeds put the lives of employees and/or consumers at risk. So for more information, check out the story link just below this video player screen, or visit online at www.whistleblowers.gov or www.osha.gov. And by the way, before I close the story, next week we're running an article from Sonal Sinha that expands on this very theme. It's called Your Employees, a Principal Factor in the Supply Chain Risk Equation. And Sinha's piece discusses how ethical employees, like those willing to step forward as whistleblowers, can help mitigate organizational risk, while those who turn a blind eye or even profit from corruption are ultimately going to destroy companies from within. That's interesting reading. I read that one already, and it's coming out for you guys on Monday. So
yeah, Sinha writes on social responsibility a lot. In fact, there's quite a few articles in our archives from Sonal Sinha.
About that.
Yeah, about that same thing. Okay, remember Moore's Law?
Sure. Yep.
Remember Moore's Law, right? That's the idea that the number of transistors per square inch on integrated circuits will double every, well, it depends who you talk to. Originally, I think it was every year, then it kind of moved up to 18 months. Now it's 2 years, but let's say doubles every year or two. This is basically held true, actually, for several decades. But even more said that there were physical limits to this. At the atomic level, you can only have a transistor get so small. Another limit is the ability to measure the semiconductors that you have made. We have the ability to manufacture semiconductor features that are in the single-digit nanometer range. This is very small. But verifying that we have created those features the way we want to measure that accurately has become increasingly more difficult. So with that in mind, there was an interesting article this week from NIST titled NIST and Intel Get Critical Dimensions with X-Rays. So since 2000, NIST and chipmaker Intel have been pioneering the application of what they call small angle X-ray scattering to meet the demanding measurement needs of the semiconductor industry I just spoke of. The technique is called CDSAXX, which I think is just pronounced CD-SAXs, for critical dimension small angle X-ray scattering. So currently, dimensional metrology tools in the semiconductor industry rely on visible and ultraviolet light with wavelengths that are larger than the features being measured. So if you think about ultraviolet light, for instance, has a wavelength down to about 100 nanometers. But newer semiconductors have features 1/10 of that. So UV light can literally not see those features. The X-rays used in NIST's CD-SAXs have a wavelength less than 0.1 nanometers, which is much smaller than the dimensions of the features on the future generation of computer chips. So CD-SAXs exploits the short wavelength of X-rays and their sensitivity to differing densities of electrons in the materials they strike in order to do the measuring. The new technique is non-destructive, does not require any sample preparation. It actually works with the test structures already used by semiconductor makers. If you're not familiar with the semiconductor industry, built into every semiconductor wafer, there are test spots where a lot of the testing takes place. So they don't have to do anything new. Those already exist. It doesn't give you we think X-ray, well, this doesn't give you the equivalent of, let's say, an X-ray picture like we think of. What it does is it collects the patterns of the X-rays scattered by the electrons in the nanostructure. That data can then be crunched by computers and they can solve for the original shape. In experiments, this is pretty crazy, in experiments, CD-Saxis measurements of a critical semiconductor feature were accurate to within 0.1 nanometers. And measurements of line shapes were accurate to about 0.2 nanometers. Now, just to put these numbers in perspective, you don't get how big 0.1 or 0.2 nanometers is. An atom is only, depending on the atom, an atom measures from 0.1 to 0.5 nanometers. That's how big an atom is. Hydrogen atom, I believe, is about 0.1 nanometers. So we're talking about measuring physical shapes at the atomic level accuracy. This is pretty darn crazy. I mean, when you get down to the numbers, this is just amazing. This achievement actually could make the experimental technology of CD-Saxis a top contender in the race to develop new inline process control tools for measuring the vanishingly small, really vanishingly small features on the next generation of computer chips. So for a little while longer, Moore's Law may stay in place, but eventually they're going to be doing something different than just making smaller and smaller features. Wow. Can't get much smaller than atoms.
I was going to say, whenever I read a story like that, I think of The Incredible Shrinking Man, a great 1956 movie. You saw that one, right?
Oh, yeah.
Help me. Yeah, but
no, that was The Fly.
That's right. That's right. Sorry, I was getting
that was
confused.
a creepy movie.
But
okay.
yeah, but no, I mean, literally, you're getting to the point where this stuff is so small that it really is inconceivable. You say a
Right.
tenth of a nanometer, but it's like you don't get what that is until you say, well, it's the size of an atom. Right. I mean, yes.
Yeah, and they're measuring stuff to see whether they're off, whether the dimensions are off by the size of a couple of atoms.
It's just remarkable.
It's nuts.
Remarkable stuff. Technology today. All right, well, our first guest on the show this week is an author, educator, and speaker who focuses on one of the most important issues of our time, corporate social responsibility, also known as CSR. The term thought leader, I think, is too often used, but in this case, it fits Wayne Visser, PhD, to a T. As Fast Company magazine said, anyone interested in CSR will eventually come across Wayne Visser. We interviewed him in the recent Quality Digest Daily article, Discovering the S in CSR, and his latest book, Sustainable Frontiers, is out now. So it's our pleasure to welcome Wayne Visser to our show. Greetings, Wayne.
Hi, good to be on your show.
How are you today?
I'm very good. I'm calling in from South Africa, so enjoying some sunshine in between the work.
Well, thank you for doing that, Wayne. We really appreciate you joining us at this off hour. Well, let's start. Let me ask you about CSR, corporate social responsibility. It's a big concept, and there's certainly a lot of inputs and outputs for an organization to consider. In your opinion, how can those who maybe are unfamiliar with CSR begin to get started with it?
Well, it's a concept that has changed a lot over time. And so even those who think that they may be familiar with it really need to get up to speed. And one thing I would say is a good starting point is for people to just consult the ISO 26000 global standard on social responsibility. And that sets out 7 core subjects that relate now to CSR and gives a lot of guidance to companies, even though it's a non-certifiable standard. But let me say this, it can also be overcomplicated. And really what we're seeing today with CSR is that it's become quite a simple concept, which is your company making a positive impact in the world or not? Is the planet and the society better off for your company existing or not? And quite simply, I often summarize that by saying you've got to look at 4 dimensions, no matter what label you use, whether it's CSR or sustainability or corporate citizenship. You look at 4 things. Are you creating value in an inclusive way in society? Are you having good governance, which relates to your theme around whistleblowing, as well as good leadership and ethics and transparency? Are you contributing to society in a way that is inclusive to your stakeholders? And are you having a positive, or at least a small negative impact on the environmental integrity, on the resources on which we're dependent? So I think, without overcomplicating it, it's really today about, are companies using their business, not the money that they make and might have spare for charity or philanthropy, but are they using their business, the core products and services and processes that they have, to make a positive impact on society and to solve some of the most difficult challenges that we have in the world today?
Well, you talk about that. You talk about that from the perspective of what your impact is, and measuring that is really important, I think, because we know, I mean, business leaders that read Quality Digest, certainly many of them come from a financial background, and I think, I mean, CSR will probably gain traction if the gains and the savings can be realized, and the benefits too. But a lot of those benefits are, I guess, what you would call soft benefits. So how can a financial leader calculate those benefits?
Well, here again, we've seen a lot of progress over the last decade or so, and companies really starting to put the numbers to those benefits. The so-called business case for CSR or sustainability is much stronger today than it was a decade or two ago. And let me give you some concrete examples just to show that if companies think of this not as an expense, but as an investment, then actually they can quantify the benefits, and those benefits are positive. So let's take General Electric as an example, GE. When Jeff Immelt came in and took over from Jack Welch, he really changed the strategic thrust of that company, and he bet the future in two areas. One was health technology, and the other one was environmental or clean technology. And if you look at their Eco-Imagination program, they have invested in R&D around those technologies roughly $12 billion. So a big investment. And you might be saying, the shareholders might be saying, where's the payback? And in fact, they've quantified that payback. And since its launch, they've had revenues related to Eco-Imagination of $160 billion. So a factor of more than 10 times. And we can take other examples. If you look at Unilever with their Sustainable Living Plan, again, the key point here is that they made a strategic commitment to sustainability. In their case, it was to double in size, halve their environmental footprint, help 1 billion people out of poverty through their products, and go 100% sustainable on their agricultural products, certified. Well, they've been tracking their results as well, and they've already saved on reductions in energy, water, materials, and waste, over 300 million euros. So there really is a strong business case to be had. And although it's true that some of the benefits are intangibles, like, for example, improved relations with stakeholders or improved brand and reputation or reduced risk, in actual fact, we've got enough now that we can measure. If you look at Interface Floor, the carpet manufacturer in the US, when they can show that since 1996, when they came up with their Mission Zero, their waste is down 91%. Their carbon emissions are down 73%. Their water is down 86%. Those are all things that you can measure and that translate into cost savings. And I really think that we're at the stage now where we're experimenting with different ways to measure. So we're starting to see methodologies like social return on investment. There's a Mexican company called Los Alamos National Laboratory, and they start to put a figure to this. So they've got $20 million of social capital that they've created, and they've got $34.5 million of social return of investment through their volunteer hours that they've put in. And then you get progressive companies like Puma, who are starting to say, well, we've got to quantify the impacts that we're having on the environment. So a conventional cotton T-shirt of Puma, they've worked out the environmental cost of that are roughly 17% of the retail value. Now that enables them to innovate on their product, and they came up with a biodegradable cotton T-shirt, and they've brought down the environmental cost of that to 12%. So these things really are quantifiable. And you get now big companies like KPMG, one of the big four accounting firms in the world, coming up with these methodologies. They've got something called true earnings, where they start with the revenue, cost, and earnings as per normal, but then they financially quantify what's the economic positive benefit through taxes and wages. And then they subtract the negative impacts of corruption. They add back the social impacts through healthcare infrastructure and education development, and they subtract through low wages and pollution. They add back through renewables and recycling, and they subtract through waste, carbon emissions, water, and use of materials, and they come up with a true earnings value. So this is really where it's at today. We're seeing improved measures, and I really think that this is certainly not an excuse. There are massive benefits to be had in this space now.
So Wayne, you mentioned some great case studies there, GE and Unilever, Puma. In your book, your new book, Sustainable Frontiers, you offer up case studies of the successful as well as some unsuccessful CSR efforts. So what are some of the commonalities? You talked about the commonalities of the successful ones. What are some of the commonalities of those that haven't been maybe so successful?
Well, let me take a few examples here to illustrate. The way to think about this is that the unsuccessful ones are ones that are stuck in outdated models or modes of CSR. And, you get some that got stuck in a defensive mode where it's all about compliance and risk management. You can look at a failed company like Enron or Lehman Brothers, where they had CSR initiatives. In fact, rather bizarrely, Lehman Brothers won a CSR award after it went bankrupt. They didn't make it strategic. And you can take many companies that are stuck in a charitable or a philanthropic mode. And then as Warren Buffett likes to say, it's only when the tide goes out that you know who's been swimming naked. And so as soon as times get tough, these are the companies that cut back on their so-called CSR spend. And then you get others that get stuck in what I call the promotional or the marketing approach, the PR approach. Here you look at BP changing their logo to Beyond Petroleum. And it was a joke, right? Because in the year that they changed their logo, as Greenpeace reminded us, they spent more on the logo than they did on renewable energy. And the most they've ever spent on renewables is 4%, and that's been going down year on year. And then we have fiascos like the Gulf of Mexico spill, which, by the way, is probably going to cost them about $55 billion. And remember that they lost 50% of their value within 50 days of that happening. So talk about a negative business case when you get it wrong. So these are some of the elements of what goes wrong. If you get stuck in a defensive or a charitable or a marketing mindset to this, then you're going to go wrong. And rather what we need is a strategic or a transformational mindset. And two quick examples for that. I mean, strategic, you take Coca-Cola. They got caught out in the district of Kerala in India for stealing the water. That was the accusation of the community. It doesn't matter if it was true, that was the perception. And so now they align water as one of their major strategic issues for the company, and they committed the company to be water neutral globally. And they invest a lot in this issue. Or take a company like Patagonia. When they realized that their biggest impact was cotton, because it's very chemical, water, and energy intensive, they committed to 100% organic cotton. They transformed that industry because they didn't even have enough organic cotton in America to supply them at that time. So that's one of the signs of the success, is you transform an industry. Secondly, they went fully transparent. So not only putting out a so-called sustainability report, they never did that. They put out what they call the Footprint Chronicles, which was measuring the impact of their products right across the life cycle and giving that information to customers so that when you buy a pair of organic jeans, you know how much water, waste, carbon was the impact of that product and how far it traveled to get to you. And finally, they question the idea that you have to be on a growth treadmill. So, you see these bizarre ads from Patagonia now saying, don't buy this jacket, because what they're saying is that we go for durability. We're about sustainability. And if you get bored of your jacket, bring it back and we'll swap it. But actually what you're buying into here is the best clothing, the best company, not the biggest. So I think these are some examples that show a transformational mindset which is really what we need if we're going to get to what is effectively another industrial revolution. We won't get to 80 or 90% less carbon in the world without completely revolutionizing capitalism and the economy. And that's what COP21 is all about in a few weeks in Paris. So watch this space.
Well, Wayne, thank you for that. A really great download here on CSR, the state of the CSR today. Thank you for joining us. Really honored to have you on the show, and we'll be talking to you in the future, I'm sure, about these topics.
And remember Wayne's book, Sustainable Frontiers.
Sustainable Frontiers. Yeah, check out Wayne's book too. Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
All right. Yeah, and a link to that book. I believe there's a link to the book below the player page. All right. Hey, a couple weeks ago, it was October 21st.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Did the Cubs win?
No, the Mets beat them, and then the Royals beat the Mets.
Jeez. Well, I was thinking the Cubs won, but I guess I was thinking that was a different universe, right? That was Back to the Future, too.
That's right.
I get my universes mixed up all the time. That was October 21st, 2015, marked the day that Marty McFly and Dr. Emmett Brown traveled back to the future in the highly successful sequel, Back to the Future 2. Tim Lozier, a Back to the Future fanboy, wrote about this in his article, Where's My Hoverboard?
Yeah.
Real-world product innovation requires more than fancy camera angles. It's been 30 years since the movie was made, and there are several websites that examine the 2015 products and innovations predicted in the movie and where we are today. Some exist, some haven't. But the reason, says Lozier, that we are not seeing some of the Back to the future is because in the real world, changing designs and processes and manufacturing is not a fly by the seat of your pants effort. It requires real thought in how we plan, design, and make product changes for the real future. Change is just as hard as it ever was, writes Lozier. When manufacturers want to make a change to a product or a process, they have to consider more than just what would be cool, like a hoverboard. Mm-hmm. It all starts from post-market feedback, whether in the form of a customer concern, an internal assessment, or suggestion. The company has to take those ideas and have a way to change the process or manage the process of the change from all areas of the business. So let's look at the hoverboard that we saw in Back to the Future. First, the company would need to issue a change control process that goes to R&D to see if taking the wheels off of a skateboard is even a good idea. Actually, before that, they have to do market research to see if people would even want a hoverboard. Well, of course the public wants a hoverboard. Who doesn't want a hoverboard? Then they would have to figure out the risks associated with a wheelless skateboard, which were probably the same risks that came up when they decided to make a wheeled skateboard. Now, since Lozier is a risk sort of guy, risk management is part of his company's product portfolio. Since Lozier looks at risk, he looks at the hoverboard product in other risk terms. What is the risk of not making a hoverboard, for instance? What if your competition comes out with it before you do? What is the risk if you decide to make a hoverboard but rush it to market to beat your competition? But maybe there's design flaws and people get hurt. How fast should you push the process? What are the risks? What about your suppliers? Do you want an off-market flux capacitor powering the anti-graviton booster in your hoverboard? Or do you want to pay the extra money to use a top-of-the-line flux capacitor? Won't that raise the price of the hoverboard and put you in adverse market position? Can you keep the price down and go with a smaller margin? What is the risk? No matter what kind of product rollout you are planning, there's risk. And those are just the tip of the iceberg. One of the positive things in our industry about the rollout of ISO 9001 2015 is that probably now more than ever, it is all of us talking about risk in more than just brand risk or product liability risk. It has us looking at ways to codify or build into our development or change processes some sort of risk analysis, what ISO 9001 2015 calls risk-based thinking. And of course, where there is a need, there's a market. Where there's a market, technology follows. There's always something to sell. As Lozier points out, there are risk management software tools connected to post-market feedback solutions that allow us to weigh options and be smart about how we go forward. It's easier today to take a manufacturing scenario and weigh the risks and costs of making a decision, one decision or another, making a decision or not making a decision. A risk management system helps us to make decisions on which change management process to use, or maybe whether we should not implement change at all.
Yeah, good.
And the risk is a big topic, and it's much broader now than we used to think of it.
It is, and it's all over. Risk is in everything, and you know what? Risk is also in dealing with your suppliers, isn't it?
That's right.
As a matter of fact, it's actually going from a hoverboard to a Segway. Imagine that.
That's very good.
Pretty
You
good.
did that very well.
Not bad. But
there is supplier risk. Exactly.
There is. Yeah.
And actually, ISO 9001 2015 addresses that.
Addresses that too, no doubt. Yep.
Well, as Randy D'Amico writes, talking about Supplier, in his article, Using ISO Management System Standards to Develop Effective Supplier Partnerships, relationships, the supplier relations between an organization and its suppliers have traditionally been characterized by adversarial activities and posturing in which at least one, or often both parties really, lose. Rather than working together to find ways to create a win-win outcome, buyers use their leverage to force suppliers to absorb costs, to obtain lower prices, and suppliers look for ways to minimize their losses by barely meeting their suppliers' specifications. Unfortunately, writes D'Amico, in a highly competitive marketplace, dysfunctional relationships like this do nothing to support the long-term success of either party. Ideally, the goal of a vendor-supplier relationship is to create and maintain a reliable and trusting partnership that allows both parties to win while also promoting their mutual objectives of continuously improving quality, productivity, and competitiveness. And here to talk about how to use ISO 9001 to develop effective supplier partnerships is Randy D'Amico, Management System Auditor for TÜV Südamerika. Hi, Randy.
Good morning, Ted.
How you doing this morning?
I'm well, yourself?
Not too bad. Good. Okay, let's get right into it. ISO 9001 2015 Section 8.4.1 talks about having criteria for evaluating suppliers. How does this tie into the risk-based thinking that ISO 9001 2015 talks about?
Well, it ties in a lot of ways. The first being that every decision an organization makes has to be based around, what are the risks to my organization? And that's no different when choosing suppliers. So the first part of that is, what are the risks with going with this particular supplier? Secondly, then you want to determine the level of control, because one of the requirements of the standard is, you need to determine what level of control you're going to put on your suppliers. So then you have to decide, okay, well, what are the risks of not putting controls on that supplier? And then that will cause you to stratify your supplier list into what I like to call three baskets, if you will. Your key suppliers, the people who, if they go down, you go down. Your critical suppliers, the people who, if they go down, you're going to be scrambling to find a replacement, and then sort of everybody else. So I think you have to really use that risk-based thinking to determine the level of control and what basket you're going to put them in.
And how about when you're not talking, let's say, a direct supplier of a part? How about with outsourcing complete processes as opposed to suppliers that supply just components? Does the standard address that as well?
It does, and the 2015 strengthens those requirements a little bit. 2008 standard just in 4.1 said if you're going to outsource processes, you need to come up with what level of control you're going to use, etc. But the new standard lumps in outsourced processes with the purchase product. It doesn't really separate the two out. It puts it right in there within section that you quoted there, 841, and says if you're going to have product shipped directly from your outsourced process to the supplier, well, then you need to determine the level of control as well. And then it gives you a whole list of things that you need to do. And it says make sure that you determine what part of the quality system they're going to have to adhere to, method for acceptance, and that's a little bit new for the 2015. 2008, I don't want to say it was loose, but it was a lot more relaxed, the requirements. The 2015 standard does strengthen that a little bit, saying that you're going to have to determine all of these things ahead of time, much like you did with purchase product. It doesn't separate those two out anymore. It pulls them in together and says whether it's externally provided services, products, or processes, you have to go through that whole list and determine how they fit into that list of requirements.
Randy, maybe you can give us a couple of quick key action items that a company should take in order to build what you could consider a collaborative supplier relationship.
Certainly. The first thing, I think the most important thing, is the sharing of information. In the past, if you were purchasing a product, that supplier may not have wanted to share with you their secrets, but under the fear that you would then start to do it yourself using their technology, their recipes, etc. So to really build a collaborative partnership, you want to make sure that there's an open flow of information both ways. And that information should include things like acceptance of product. What do you deem acceptable? There should be no question when it comes to whether a product is good or non-conforming. In the past, I've been involved in several organizations where that was a moving target. We were a supplier, and one week this was acceptable, then the next week it wasn't acceptable. That information should be very clearly communicated. The sharing of complaints. If the organization who is selling the merchandise gets a complaint, they shouldn't just issue a scar, lob it over the wall, and count on the supplier to work it out. They should be actively involved. And again, we're talking about key suppliers. When you do your risk analysis and say, these are the folks that I really need to depend on, then you want to make sure that you have that open two-way street. You're sharing information. You're making sure that product acceptance is clearly understood, and that any type of issue that arises is handled quickly and involving both parties. It is not just hopped onto the supplier to figure it out on their own.
Hey Randy, from an auditor's point of view, what for ISO 9001 2015, what are auditors going to be looking for when they go into audit a company in terms of their supplier relationship and so forth?
We're going to be looking for the same things that we always have. The difference is that I hear a lot of folks saying, well, 2015 doesn't require documentation, and you're right, it doesn't. But I think documentation is easy. I don't suspect that people are going to throw their documents away. So as an auditor, I'll still be looking for the same things. The difference is if they don't have an approved supplier list, well, you can't really issue them a corrective action because there's no requirement to have these type of things documented. However, how do they know who they can buy from? I think it's a lot harder to throw away all your documentation and wing it than it's going to be to just keep what you've got, add to it where need be. But I'll be looking for the same things. As far as the purchase product, there's not much difference. The difference is really going to be on the supplier side for outsourced processes. There is, in my opinion, a strengthening of the requirements for that. In the past, it was very amorphous. Yeah, we send this out to be something or other. And okay, but now I'm going to want to see those controls that the standard requires. Where was the risk analysis done as to how this will affect your process? And show me where now you're sharing that information. Where are the requirements for acceptance? Those type of things. So I think there's a little bit of a strengthening on the outsource side, and there's going to be some growing pains there as companies get used to that.
Okay. Well, Randy D'Amico, Management System Auditor for TÜV Südamerika. Randy and I are going to be doing a webinar next week called Shift from Approved Vendor to Strong Supply Chain Partner next Tuesday, November 10th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. I'm there just to moderate. Randy's going to be the subject matter expert, obviously. And so, Randy, we will catch up with you next Tuesday.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Randy. All right, well, that's our show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Wayne Visser, for joining us via Skype, talk about CSR.
And Randy D'Amico.
Thank you, Randy D'Amico, right there, for joining us via Skype to talk about the upcoming webinar. Again, Shift from Approved Vendor to Strong Supply Chain Partner. That is Tuesday, November 10th, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Randy and Dirk together talking about this is an important topic, so make sure you check that out. Look, keep an eye on your email because they'll be having opportunity to sign up for that webinar via eBlasts, and there's also a link in Randy's article right below the player page right down there. So all of you have a great weekend. We'll see you next week for another great week at QDD, webinar on Tuesday, and QDL right back here on Friday.
That's right. Have a good weekend.
We'll see you. Bye.